Hi, everyone. I'm Ed Zakreski, the Managing Director of Roundhouse Theater, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the inside look for Throw Me on the Burnpile and Light Me Up. If you're watching this, that means you are a Roundhouse supporter, and especially at these times, I want to thank you so much for your generous support of Roundhouse. It's been a year unlike any other, and Roundhouse is extraordinarily proud of what we've done throughout the pandemic. We would not have been able to do it without the incredible support from so many friends and donors. So thank you for what you do. And we hope these little looks inside our process are a big help and of interest to you. I also want to say that I hope you are getting vaccinated. We are looking forward to welcoming you back to Roundhouse. We hope that that's going to be in the fall. We do not have any announcements as of yet, but that's where we are aiming. I now want to bring on Ryan Roulette, our artistic director and the director of tonight's show. But before we get into talking about the show, I want to share with everybody a really great announcement that we heard today. That Roundhouse has been nominated by the Drama League for the Adrienne Kennedy Festival in the category of Outstanding Digital Theater Collection or Festival. So this is a production we did in association with the McCarter Theater Center in Princeton, New Jersey, and we are just thrilled for the nomination. In addition, American Dreams, which we co-produced with the Working Theater in New York, was also nominated for Outstanding Interactive or Socially Distanced Theater. So Ryan, these are two award nominations that usually go only to Broadway or off-Broadway shows, but because of the pandemic, they've reached across the country and they've settled on Roundhouse for two of them.
Yeah, it's kind of a big honor. Definitely not something I ever thought any of our shows would be even available to get. And the fact that this year in the middle of the pandemic, we not only got nominations from that, but also our production of The Heel, which we did with the Getty Villa, got nominated for 5 Ovation Awards. So we've been nominated literally coast to coast this year, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. So let's talk about this show. I know this is one you have been very excited to work on. You were studying it hard before you got into directing. When you were looking at shows to do, knowing that we were going to be doing them on stage, but filming them without an audience, what made this show stand out to you?
Well, I mean, so at the time it was Nicole Watson was our associate artistic director, and Nicole and I were really trying to figure out what was the right kind of show for this moment. You know, you pick these shows so far in advance that it's always really difficult to figure out what are we going to need, what are we going to want, and all 3 of the shows that we ended up picking share some similar characteristics. This, like A Boy and His Soul, is a one-person show. We're Gonna Die, which will come up next, is a one-person show with a 4-person band. That keeps it contained. It allows us to be able to really make sure that we have a small pod of people because we have to contain it so thoroughly. And so that was a practical reason for it. But like so many of our plays, this is a play that shines a light on a segment of our community that we don't really hear from on a regular basis. In this case, the rural poor, or specifically the white rural poor of the South. And it is also a piece that is a memory play that deals with a childhood that would, by most people's recollection, seem not ideal in many ways. And yet, in looking back on it and tracing her path through it, the playwright, who's also is also the lead character of the play, is able to realize how amazing her upbringing was, how essential it is to the American dilemma that we're dealing with right now as a country. And I think in that way, it fits perfectly for this moment. It is both topical in the sense that it is, these are, as Beth said in rehearsal the other day, some of the people in this play stormed the Capitol. Some of the people in this play supported people that stormed the Capitol. And at the same time, it is about, it is a play that is filled with heart, and it's a play that allows you to look at your own situations, which right now are probably far less than ideal, and hopefully be able to look at it and see the ways in which we have all grown, and the ways that we've all changed, and the ways that maybe despite how horrible it's been, there have been some positive things in it. And I think this piece as a whole sort of does that. It looks at something that's incredibly difficult and might seem like it is far removed from what we would consider to be the ideal, and flips it on its head and makes you realize that the adversity is actually what made it as beautiful as it was. So I love the play. I love the play in a lot of different ways. It's a great, great Southern story. Beth and I are both from the South, so it's certainly something we've talked a lot about. But more than anything, it is a story that we really, as I said before, that we really rarely see in our stage. The American poor don't really make the American theater on a regular basis. It's the exact same reason that we did Ironbound a couple of years ago. That was a piece about immigrants, and really, the people living at the poverty line on an immigrant basis. And this is different, and it also deals with the criminal justice system in a big way. So it is very different piece, but it is in fitting with all of the pieces that we choose all the time.
Well, I can give a little inside info to our audiences that sometimes when you're looking at shows, you will say, yeah, I may want to direct this one. I may want to interview people before I make that decision. And there are other times that you say, if we do the show, it's mine.
Yeah.
This was one of those shows. Why is that?
Well, I mean, I think the South is an interesting place. I mean, I'm from New Orleans, and I think anybody who grew up in the Southeast would probably say New Orleans is Southern-ish because it's its own thing unto itself. But I certainly have spent a lot of time in the South. A lot of my friends are in the true South, and the rest of Louisiana is very much part of the rest of the South. Even if New Orleans has its own little flavor, and you've heard me say this before. I think the South is one of the few places in America that we can still that people still denigrate and talk about as if the entire community is monolithic, in the same way that often people talk about race, negatively talk about race, and I have always struggled with that. It's been one of those things where I think. The South has a lot of problems. It is certainly not devoid of the issues that people make fun of it for or comment on. But what I love about this play is that it lays all of that out, and it plays into all of those perceptions, and then it flips it. And then you start to see that the way that we perceive it is not what it really is. This is also a play very much about trash in many different forms. And specifically about the way that we throw people away, and that we think about people as trash, whether that is, in this case, criminals who are on death row, who nobody wants to think about, nobody wants to defend, even though we have a constitution that says they are allowed a criminal defense, or the people who defend them, who many people consider to be trash, like Lucy's father in this play. So for so many different reasons, it just felt like a piece that was not something that I can look at it and immediately go, oh, I know these people, I know this world, because this isn't something that I know incredibly well. But it was something that I felt passionate about from the very beginning, that this is a story that I wanted to tell, and the way in which it is told, which is really embracing sort of the beautiful oral tradition of the South, was something that I felt I could really do justice to. So I'm excited to be working on it now, and to be working on it with Beth, who really, I don't think I could have found a better person to do this. Beth, when we did Small Mouth Sounds together, we would sit backstage. The entire cast of Small Mouth Sounds would sit backstage, and listen to Beth basically do a one-woman show after the show, because we didn't speak in that show, so everybody wanted to speak afterwards. So we'd all hang out and have drinks, and she basically had a one-person funny, comedic show that she was making on her own. And I kept saying, at some point we need to do a one-person show together. And then I found this one.
Well, we could not have a better introduction. So it's time to welcome on Beth Hilton.
That's the best. Can you just say that like every 4 times I do this thing, like right before I say it, just tell that story. I'll be like, yeah, I can do this now. Let's go.
So our audiences have seen Beth not only in Small Mouth Sounds, but also in Handbagged. So we are thrilled to welcome Beth back to our stages. So Beth, you are doing a one-person show, but you're going to be doing it during COVID, and you're going to be doing it without an audience, and filming it. Does that make you approach this any differently as you get ready for it?
Well, I think a lot of actors probably feel about COVID that we've all been doing our one-person shows without an audience, right? That's kind of how we've survived it. But I think in the room, because it's such a gift to be back in the room. I told Ryan when I auditioned for it, I was like, I literally started crying when I walked in the rehearsal room, and I'm masked up to audition, and he's masked up, of course. And I was like, I'm crying and I'm shaking. It's not because I'm nervous. I'm just so happy to be here. And Ryan's like, I totally understand. I can't get up and greet you, but I totally understand. But for me right now, the process is the process, because I'm in the room with Ryan. I'm in the room with Shay, the stage manager, and New. And I think until it's done, it's going to feel like I'm just doing a play. And then the sad part, of course, is that I won't get to perform it for a live audience. But the gift of it certainly outweighs any cost of that. I'm just so grateful to be making work and making this play and doing it with Ryan. And it's a real gift.
Yeah, and our goal with these shows has really been, let's make a play and then record it so that it feels like the audience is in, so that the people watching at home feel like they're watching a live play. So we're not really doing anything differently until we get to the point that we have to fix the lights slightly for lighting and then bring the cameras in.
Right.
The big downside is with a piece like this, where there are moments that are so incredibly funny, it's gonna be hard not to have a full audience laughing, or more importantly, for Beth and I to be able to go, well, that joke didn't work tonight. Let's delay the timing a little bit, or hey, we stepped on that laugh.
Yeah.
Let's take another breath there. Those are the things that are really tough without an audience.
Yeah. There's been enough times that already just in the first couple weeks, trying to figure out where the joke is, because you have to build around the joke even if the audience isn't there. A number of conversations where Ryan's like, I don't think it's there. I think it's here. And I'm like, yeah, that's where it is, which is still fun to work out, but an audience makes that easier for sure.
Well, you've raised an interesting question about the rehearsal process that I want to delve into. But first, I would just want to say to the audience, if you do have questions, we're going to be getting to a Q&A later. Please put them in the YouTube comments section. We would appreciate any questions you have, and we'll share them with Ryan, Beth, and Ivania, who's going to be joining us shortly. But Beth, you talked about the rehearsal process. So a lot of people think that what the director does is just move people around like pieces on a chessboard. But we know that it's actually more than that. And so I'd like for you two to talk about, how did this rehearsal process start? What do you do at first? Because I know there's some work you do before you get into actually putting it on its feet.
Well, I think I'll begin just about how I started approaching it. I knew that I wanted, because so much of it is to be built in collaboration. So I wanted to be very familiar with the story and have a strong point of view, but also be malleable enough that Ryan and I could shape it together. So it doesn't feel at all like I came in with any sense. We're definitely building this play together. I
think the early part of a play is always the same thing, which is that we are sitting around the table. We'll read through the play once, just straight through, normally with a group of, staff members and things like that, maybe some donors. But then we will spend the next couple of days, probably 4 days or so, where we will just break down in a way, it's almost like doing a master's level semester long class on a play, on a script. in 4 days, because you literally break it apart to the point that you want to be able to understand why every single beat is in there, why every moment is in there, what she's trying to accomplish. Even places where we had to say, oh, this thing is not right, or this is odd here, or we don't understand why she's doing this here. So that by the time you get up on your feet and you start working, you understand what you're saying. You understand why you're saying what you're saying. You understand how one piece leads to the next. I think both of us, to a large extent with this piece, because of the way it's not written like a traditional theater piece. It's kind of written like 8 short stories, and even with titles. And so sometimes the bridges from one short story into the next are not real easy. In fact, in some cases they're not there. Mm-hmm. And partly what we're trying to figure out is how do we make those connections, and how do we move from one thing to the other, and why did she structure it this way? So we spent a lot of time sort of in the textual analysis stage of it at that point. And then, with a one-person show, especially because Beth and I as actors work very similarly, and I kind of knew that this was going to be a fun thing for us to work on. And because we've worked on other shows together, we have a shared vocabulary. We spent the next thing we did before we ever started staging anything was, I think, Beth, is it 10 different characters that you're voicing?
I think it's 10 different characters I voiced, but we really fleshed out 8, I think, right? We made 8 really strong, and a couple just kind of speak, and I speak through their voice, but I physically manifest 8 different people. I think it's 8 solid people.
And so we spent, what was it, maybe a day, 2 days, day and a half?
It was 2 days. It was 2 days. They were so much fun, because that's like the actor's dream, to get to do all that character work, and we don't get to do it that much. So it was 2 of the best days of my professional career. It was amazing. So we built all these crazy characters.
It was just full character exploration. Like one of the things that we did was, we would start moving through this work. Beth would start moving through the space.
But it was it was us. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the whole cast, the royal we.
The royal we.
Well, I stood up to the side and explain. But Beth would move through the space, and I would have her pay attention to her rate and her rhythm and different things like that. And then we would adjust it, and I would say, okay, so now let's think about this character, and what's this person's rate, and find that person's rate. Okay, let that go. Now, where does this person lead from? Because, some people lead from their forehead. Some people lead from their chest. Some people lead from their stomach. Some people lead from their knees. And where you lead from and what your rate is can immediately start to take you out of your thinking brain into your more physical, creative space. And stuff just shows up there. So basically what would happen was I would get Beth to that point. Normally by that point, then I would start saying, hey, voice a line as this character. And sometimes things came out like there were things like the character of Tinsley is somebody that we both love. And Beth kind of knew what Tinsley's voice was before she started. But some of the other characters, we're dealing with people on death row. We're dealing with people who are on the page seem like really horrible people. Like just mean, horrible people. And we would start doing an improv. And once Beth would find the voice, then I would often interview that person. This sounds so weird when we talk about it as our jobs. But this is really what so essentially, she would find the character of Tinsley, let's say, and then I would start talking to Tinsley. Or she found, there was a day where she found the mom. And then I played a criminal coming to talk to the dad. It's just playing, you know what I mean? None of it is planned out. It's just sort of like I would take on something and ask her questions, and it would lead somewhere, and we would see where it go. And the great thing about doing that kind of work is because it takes you out of your thinking brain, because it's really right brain work, you make connections and discoveries that you could never possibly make just from looking at the text. I mean, Ronnie Lee's mom, I'm thinking about, Beth, like there's no way we would have found what you found. Mm-hmm. You surprised yourself. It was the way she moved and the way she talked and her rates. Then all of a sudden Beth had a moment where she was like, oh my God, there's so much immense sadness. Like I felt so much sadness in stepping into this woman's shoes. And I had no idea. So we did all of that work before we ever staged a moment of the play. We actually did not start staging the play until maybe the very last day of the first week. And then we staged it all within
that's right.
the second week, basically, and got a full shape to it. And today we did our first stumble through. So it's a little different with a one-person show just because of that, because you have to find the time to create all the characters. You can't create them in relation to anybody else, because Beth has to be able to go from one into another immediately, just like as we saw Ro do, except with Boy and Soul, those characters are a little bit more, I don't know, they're more clearly defined in the text than they are in this show. This show, they move between characters more easily, and sometimes in less linear line, in a less linear way.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So we've referred to the playwright a couple times, but we actually haven't mentioned who she is. Can you tell us a little bit about Lucy Alibar?
Beth, you want to take it, or you want me to? Oh, she may have froze. Yeah. So Lucy Alibar is probably.
You went away for a second, so I'm here. Lucy.
Go ahead, Beth. Go ahead.
Oh, me? You ready for me? Okay. Sorry, I had like a little weird where all my screens went funky. That's welcome to COVID time. Lucy Alibar is best known for writing The Beasts of the Southern Wild, the screenplay for that, and she's terrific. Like, I think Ryan can probably speak to more because he's had more conversations with her during the process of this, but she's been incredibly generous in terms of like responding to questions that we have. And I mean, clearly if you saw Beasts of the Southern Wild, you know, she's got a very particular point of view as an artist. And there's this wonderful magic in her work. She wrote the screenplay to Troop Zero, which is a pretty realistic play, film set in the 70s. And even that has just an element of, I don't want to say whimsy, because whimsy is too easy a word. There's a real magic in it. And I said to Ryan today, one of the things that this play forces you to do, and I think that this is something that I think Lucy is confronting in her writing, is she forces you to have a radical compassion. And I think right now in the world where it's just so easy to be angry and write things off, practicing that radical compassion is in itself an act of magic, right? Is in itself an act of creation. So it's so that's what I'm taking from her work. But Ryan may be able to speak more.
No, I mean, I think the other thing to add to this is Lucy started as a playwright. In fact, Lucy and Lauren Gunderson were playwrights starting out at the same time. They were like child playwrights winning competitions and battling each other as kids.
Wow.
And yeah, crazy, right? In Georgia. And Lucy ended up adapting one of her plays into Beasts of the Southern Wild. And then while she was on the press junket for Beasts of the Southern Wild, she started writing these short stories about her dad. As she said, she started writing about a atheist father growing up in a Pentecostal community. And it became so much more than that, but to some extent, that's still the basis, it's still the heart of what she started writing. She didn't know at the beginning that this was going to be a play. She wasn't really sure what it was. It was just a way, because Beasts of the Southern Wild is very much about, a child and the child's father. Troop Zero also is very much from a child's point of view. This play is all set in her 4th grade year. There's something about the way that Lucy writes that's childhood. She's able to find a way inside of childhood, specifically inside of young girls who are precocious and daring and very, very imaginative. And she uses that sort of childlike imagination to be able to tackle very big subjects, because through a child's eyes, you see things unfiltered by the knowledge that we all have. So there's things that Lucy, that Lammy, the young version of Lucy in the play, there are things that Lammy is realizing about the world that as adults we all know, but seeing a 10-year-old come to those conclusions and seeing it through a 10-year-old's eyes makes it fresh for all of us again. So that's sort of the beauty of what Lucy does. She's currently writing the adaptation of Where the Crawdads Sing. This is a piece that she performed herself at at Center Theater Group, and then at Lincoln Center. And then it's had a couple of small productions, but it's been interesting. The play has actually changed a lot during the course of our rehearsals. There were a few things in it that we were like, hey, Lucy, how come she's studying Georgia history when the play is set in Southern, in the Panhandle? What's going on here? And what about this? And what about this? And she sort of explained to us that, I was advised, because so much of this is real, I was advised to change the names and change the locations of things. So we've actually been helping her reset the play in Southern Georgia instead of in the Panhandle where she's actually from, and change some names and things like that. So it's been fun because she's been on the phone with us all the time. And because she's also a screenwriter in addition to being a playwright, it's very different than working with, say, a Tony Kushner, who, if you say, hey, is this a misprint? And he says, no, that's not a misprint whatsoever. Say exactly what it is, and the comment's there for a reason. With Lucy, she's sort of like, oh, whatever you guys need to cut. If it just feels like too many words to Beth, just cut it. I mean, it's very open. It's very much like the way you would approach almost a film. Like, you guys do it and tell me what works, and I'm cool with it, and just let me know what you're doing. So it's a fun way to work with a new playwright for sure.
Well, I want to get a little bit more into the questions about Lucy and this being so based on her life, Beth. Mm-hmm. This is in some ways autobiographical and in some ways not. How does that change how you approach the role?
Well, it actually goes back a little bit to the character work that Ryan was talking about. My favorite thing as an actor is Beth does not like to be looked at. I love to be an actor and inhabit someone else and live that person's life, right? So the fact that it is so very specific and so very this person's life, it actually just makes my map so much easier. Like, obviously, like, I have to work with Ryan and we have to craft it. But the more detail she has, the more real Lammy is. I'm playing Lammy. The more real Lammy is, and the easier it is. Now, there is normally, I play people further away from me. For example, when I played the Queen of England for you guys, I said to Ryan, I was like, I just want to say that I'm here with my redneck accent, and this is the same theater where I played the Queen of England. So I just want to point that out. But normally people are a little further away from my experience. And so much about this, even the year, her fourth grade year, my third grade and fourth grade year were such massive years for me in my life. I even broke my arm, my left arm, just like the character does. So much of it is very close to my personal experience, and some of the people are very close to people I have known. So it's actually both a wonderful thing to inhabit Lammy, but also get to bring so much of my lived history in, and especially now at the end of COVID and this year, to get to open up my heart and tell stories about a lot of people who actually are no longer alive in my life is another reason to just celebrate this gift.
Wow. There was a moment the other day in rehearsal where Beth did something and then she said, okay, now I need to call my cousins and tell them they're in the play.
Yeah.
But I mean, I will say, one of the things that is, as much as we're saying we can identify with all of this and everything else, there's a part of this story that I think we're all learning. And I include, our stage management team, I include Nason, our dramaturg, on this, which is that Lucy's dad, what makes this story so special is that it's very much an homage to her dad, a love letter to her father and the way she was raised. And her dad, Baya Harrison III, is a criminal defense attorney who mostly represents people on death row. And so much of the play deals with his job. And the play is very much about the way that Lammy ends up in fourth grade working for her father. And, talking about, like, the first murder case we worked on together was this. She's in fourth grade. She's 9 at the time she's saying this. But it is to be able to look at people who have committed incredibly horrific crimes and who still deserve a defense, because, as her father says, these people didn't pop out this way. There's Beth, you have I don't remember the words exactly, but what is that? What is it that he says there? Because I love
he said that Gary Dwayne didn't just pop out of nowhere and give some of the character Gary Dwayne's backstory, and explains that he defends him because he swore an oath on the Constitution to defend, that everyone deserves a defender. But the father is invested in the backstory. Like, the father has this radical compassion for people because no one just comes out of the womb born a killer.
And that's the thing that, so much of what we learn about her dad and so many of the lessons that he passes on to her, are things like everybody deserves a defender. And, we're not all raised in the same way. We have to be able to take people for not just their actions, but understand how their actions are a result of a lifetime of people not paying attention to them, a lifetime of people treating them like they're nobody. A lot of the people that are on death row that we visit in this play are people with extremely low IQs, people who were abused as children, people that were essentially thrown away by the system in one way or the other. And her dad's whole point is, it's emblematic of the South as a whole. The South as a whole is very similar. The South as a whole, people denigrate the South, and people will talk about like all of the racism in the South and everything else. But his point is, where were all those people when they were rewriting the textbooks to take slavery out of the reasons that we went to the Civil War in the first place? Where were all those people when we were redistricting to the point that blacks couldn't get the right to vote? Like, you can't just criticize if you're not going to get involved. And I think to me, that is, especially, we talked a lot about it, like this week, Georgia passed some of the, most ridiculous, most stringent Jim Crow-esque laws around voting that we've seen in, I don't even know how many years. And Beth came into rehearsal one day just fired up about it. And I was like, great, because this is what the play is about. Like, that's ultimately what it's about, is that we can't just stand by. If we're going to criticize things, you can't just stand by and criticize from a distance. If you want to criticize, get involved. Find a way to get yourself involved and make a difference in people's lives. I feel like that's the ultimate big lesson that Lammy takes away, is that, yes, there's tons of people who, for one reason or another, end up doing these horrible things, end up not, hurting other people in horrible ways. That doesn't mean we just turn a blind eye to them and celebrate their death like so many Americans do when people get executed, which shows up very much in the play. And by seeing it through a fourth grader's eyes, a kid who is still full of love and compassion for everybody in the world, I think we're all reminded of our common humanity and the fact that that should be our response to any human being being killed in any way. So it's a really gorgeous piece. It's super funny, but there are moments that will just really rip your insides out in a great way.
Yeah, that's something I want to come back to in a moment, because we are talking about this like it's, Death of a Salesman.
It's funny.
It's super funny.
It is a hilarious play.
It's funny.
But we have our costume designer has been waiting in the virtual wings for a while, so I want to bring on Ivania Stack, Roundhouse Theater resident artist and Roundhouse Theater artist board member, and generally all around great person. Ivania, thank you for joining us. So this is an interesting design challenge. So you have a single character, you have one costume and one jacket that she puts on. And theoretically, this is a show that takes place contemporaneously. So Beth could walk on in Beth Hilton's clothes and do it. But obviously there's a lot more to it than that. And, you bring your incredible background and talent to this. Tell us a little bit about your process in doing a show that on the surface might seem so simple.
That is so true about Beth being able to, because I watched the Zoom read through of Beth reading it, and I was like, okay, done, I'm out, I'm going home. I'm already home. Yeah, why do we need it? I think it's doing a one-person show for me, it's like one of my favorite things because it's all about little details and little specificities and color choice and the length of a sleeve. And when I get into all of those little bitty details, I love it because it's like I guess it's my way of getting into the character as well. And another thing I love is that you don't need much because the actor, you don't need to, you don't need 6 hats and some scarves and some funny noses. The actor is going to do all of that magic for you. So you almost just need to provide them with whatever base they need to jump off from, is the way I think of it. So for Beth, all of those beautiful characters are going to come out of this base. And for our approach to this is for the entire design, and you can see a little bit of a glimpse of sneak peek of what scenery might look like that's behind our character here, is the idea of sitting outside with someone, sitting around a campfire, going camping, drinking a beer, and then hanging out with one of the most incredible storytellers ever, telling you about their childhood, right, and making you laugh and cry and just having this like memorable outdoors moment. Another really important part of the storytelling is this is our character grown up. And I think that's an important point because, a lot of the moments in the play is this idea that people underestimating this child and underestimating her intelligence and kind of seeing her as not worth something. And so here we have the adult version who's this freaking incredible storyteller. And where would that be if someone like her father or other people along the way hadn't believed in her and put confidence there? So that doesn't mean that we need to see her in $1 million, in a Gucci suit or something to show that she is now worth something. What I like is that, yes, maybe her clothes are a little cleaner. Maybe they're a little bit more expensive, but she's still like scrappy, down to earth, someone you would really just want to hang out with in a camping chair, drinking a beer. And still like a little bit in those nature colors to just sort of bring us like this idea of being part of the earth and part of the roots of where she grew up and played and tumbled and cartwheeled. And we still see a nod to that. But I think that covers it. Did I leave anything out, my good friend?
No. I mean, I know you spent a good deal of time deciding on what kind of T-shirt Lammy would wear. And tell us a little bit about like how many T-shirts or how many hours you spent. And what was that process like of like winnowing down to this is what we're going to choose for her?
It's interesting too, because a part of that is also me learning a little bit from Boy and a Soul as far as like what colors will read well, as far as if you were watching it from the audience at Roundhouse and also in a filmed version. Also having her be part of her environment but stand out from it is really important. So I wanted this very royal blue. And so in the world of T-shirts, for some reason, there's navy, and there's gray blue, and then there's like baby blue, which is sort of our sky color. So we actually found a really good T-shirt, and now I got myself a hot plate, y'all. I'm gonna be dyeing some T-shirts. I'm gonna be tie-dyeing T-shirts, and I can't tell you how freaking excited I am about this. I got the dye. It's COVID. We need projects.
Yes.
So, yes, I mean, it was the bread making is over. It's time for some T-shirt dyeing. But finding that right color is it's amazing how fussy I can get about that. I want something that has like a little bit of the like sound cheesy, but like a little bit of the like slice or a refraction of the like soul color of the character. So it's bold, but it also can't be so freaking bright that it distracts from all that beautiful emotion and work she's doing. So finding that exact right thing, there is a hunt for it, and it should be.
Yeah, I mean, I would say like I think it is easy to think about a costume that looks like a regular something that somebody would wear in the street and go, oh, that must have taken 2 seconds. there's 30 pairs of shoes that Beth tried on. There's, I mean, tons of t-shirts and pants, because I think you have to actually flip it on its head. When you are doing something where you have 12 costume changes and you get to create a character over 12 costume changes, you have a lot of time and money to spend to create that character. When you have one look that needs to serve 10 different characters, plus 2 characters in 2 different time periods at the same time, as well as fit within the worlds that you're designing and pop out from it on both live and film, that's extraordinarily hard, which is why I immediately called Ivania for this, because she is the perfect person for this and did a beautiful job with it. I love how it looks.
And may I just say, Ivania, I would not call it fussy. I would call that attention to detail, and I appreciate it.
So let's talk a little bit more about some of the other design elements. Paige Hathaway, who's also a resident artist, designed the set, is unable to be with us tonight. But Ryan, can you talk a little bit about this?
Yeah, I mean, so when we first started talking about it, as Ivania said, one of the things that we said, Lucy says about the play, that performing the play feels like being at a barbecue talking to friends, telling tall tales with friends. And it has always felt like that to me. From the very first second I read it, I felt like, God, what this play reminds me of is the thing that we all did of just being able to hang out in somebody's backyard and drink some beers and talk, just sharing stories with each other, something that we have not been able to do for over a year now, to be able to just hang out with friends and tell our stories, right? And certainly as theater people, we're very good at telling stories, and we enjoy doing that with each other and all miss it a lot. So that became the basis of it. And I early on also decided that I didn't want to try to create the world of the play. The world of the play, you have this huge, there's so many things in the play that are described by the playwrights. And they are both magical and realistic, but go to numerous different locations. And I think a lot of times when people are trying to tackle a play like this, what they will do is sort of create like a, almost like a junk pile behind them that they can pull anything out of. Oh, look, here's a filing cabinet because I'm talking about being in an office now. And now here's a chair that's over here so that I can sit in this chair and I'm in this location. Rather than doing that, what we wanted to do, especially because it's on film, was to embrace the raw theatricality that can come from from putting it in a location that is reminiscent of the world, but not specifically the world. So this is not the place where Lucy grew up. This is Lucy and her friends hanging out by water, telling a story. But in the process of doing that, it becomes the location. We very purposely have decided not to use any hand props. You know, you don't have moments where she's pulling out things and really opening it up and looking at pictures. Instead, it's done the same way you would if you were in just a rehearsal hall with just imaginary things. Everything is imaginary, as you would if you were just telling a friend by a campfire a story. And to me, doing that both embraces the truth of the play, that it is a single person telling a story about the past, that you're not fully entering into the past. It's not a movie where, you know, you introduce something and then you actually go into the past and see it. But it also adds this element of sort of visual metaphor to the play that I think is something that can exist in theater that does not exist well when you film often. You know, you don't really rely on visual metaphors in the same way that you would on stage as you do in film. And I wanted to try to see if that's possible. I don't know if it's going to be. We'll see how it turns out. But I think what we have tried to do is to make this as theatrical as we can by actually stripping away all the stuff and truly letting it be a single actor on stage, a single tree, a backdrop, 2 chairs, and an ice cooler and a fire pit. And we will travel to many, many different locations with just that setup. And to me, that's sort of the beauty of creating a piece of theater, is that you can do that in a way that you can't with other art forms.
Thank you. So let's pivot to some questions from the chat. First is a question from Adrian Nelson for Ryan. Will people be able to see this live at any point in the future? There is also a call out that I will second, that Ivania is a goddess and a gift.
Yep, I will third that.
Unfortunately, no. We are not in a position to be able to allow people to see it live. When we first picked these shows, the hope was that these would be the first shows that we would be doing with a combo of filmed plus socially distanced audiences. Unfortunately, we're just not in a position, both in terms of county rules, equity rules, all those things, to be able to do that right now. So it will only be available digitally, except to a handful of people who will be in the theater to watch it. The last show that we just did, Boy and a Soul, was only a few of the designers in the house. It wasn't even everyone. Like, Ivania never stepped foot in the theater, even though she designed the show. She watched the entire thing on Zoom. This version of this production will have all of the design team. And we also have the ability to invite a few other staff members, like maybe 10 other staff members, to have a little bit more laughter and stuff in the house, because the rules have just changed. We're hoping that by the next show, we might be able to have like a full house or close to a full house for a taping. But at this point, I think the earliest we're looking at having live performance is probably September. And that's at earliest. We'll see. I don't want to guarantee that.
Before I move to the next question, I also just want to acknowledge that along with Ivania and Paige, Harold Burgess is our lighting designer, Matt Nielsen is our sound designer, and Maboud Ebrahimzadeh is our director of photography. But that's all stuff you will see once the final product is put out, and we're looking forward to that. So the next question is for Beth. From Stephanie DeCibor. So from an actor's perspective, is it significantly more difficult to carry off, I think, the one-person show during COVID, or does it give you a different opportunity?
I won't say, I'm halfway through, right, of building it, so I won't say that it's more difficult. It definitely feels like different opportunities, for sure. In terms of the line load, even though it's 60 pages and just me, I've had that big of a line load before, but like in a two-hander or something, or some other plays. But it is the arc of not just carrying the show, but really I am the story and inhabiting other people. That right now I'm still in the place of it feels like an opportunity more than a difficulty, for sure. But it's definitely different, and because it is written in a storytelling form, the rules around it, I mean, we're still kind of navigating what they are.
Thank you. I'm going to go back to Ryan with the next question. The title, Throw Me on the Burnpile and Light Me Up. Can you say anything about it without giving anything important in the plot away?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can say where that line specifically comes from without, I don't think we're really giving anything away. Where our main character, Lammy, grows up and lives, where the majority of the play is set, is I mentioned that her dad is a defense attorney. He is a defense attorney who literally will take anyone who comes. Sometimes the state of Georgia pays a portion of the fees with the expectation that the criminals themselves will pay the remainder of it. Most of them pay in livestock, goods, and services. So the house is a big wood house that sits on an old watermelon field that he got from helping some guys negotiate a deal to get rid of the watermelon field. There's an old truck that they got for this thing. There's goats that they got for something else. And in the center of that big old dry watermelon field, her dad has built a burn pile. I don't really see burn piles outside of the South that much, but a burn pile.
Yeah, but we have a burn pile. I always had a burn pile. So it's like one of those things where it's like, oh, it's the burn pile. The burn pile is just the place where all the trash goes.
Yeah,
it's just
and
too
then you
big to
eventually
put
burn
in
it.
trash. Yeah, and then you burn it.
And the difference is this one is huge. And they say it's, it's all the stuff we didn't want. It's stuff that washes up from it's literally, this is a world where trash is literally coming up through the ground. So they'll find parts of an old Civil War cannon. They'll find things like, from cowboys from hundreds of years ago. In the character's mind, they're finding mastodons and dinosaurs. And anything they don't want, they just throw in the burn pile, including a number of things from the people that her dad represents. And the title comes from her dad early on says that when he dies, it's a pretty elaborate story, but that when he dies, he wants a number of things to happen. And at the end of it, he just wants his body thrown on the burn pile and just light the whole thing up. And that's where it comes from. But the burn pile plays a pretty significant part in the telling of the story as a whole.
Next question is from Ed Grossman. And for Ryan, can you talk a little bit about the taping process, how many takes we're going to do in that process?
Sure. So the way that this is working, Equity's rule with taping is very different than what we had with SAG. With SAG, we were able to film out of order, and so we shot it kind of like a film. With Equity, you shoot the entire thing straight through it is a piece of theater. We start, we run the show, all the light cues, everything, and we film it. We are going to film it 3 times. We film it 3 times for a couple of different reasons. I mean, we save a 4th one just in case, like with Boy in His Soul, during the very first run of it, Rose's mic fell off, and he didn't fully realize that his mic had fallen off. And so we lost half that take. So we needed to do another one. But we move the camera angles between them so that we get numerous different locations. So with 3 filmings of it, if we want to, we could potentially get up to 9 different camera angles over those 3 takes. We may end up doing some of the same. We'll have to see how Maboud wants to shoot this once we have the full shape of the piece. He just saw it for the first time an hour or 2 ago. And then the other big piece of this is that it's not just that it's 3 runs in front of a guest audience and we're just filming it. It's also that because the camera sees things slightly differently than the way the human eye does, we also have to slightly re-tech the show and change the way the show is done. So essentially, we will go into our normal tech process and we will finish the show the way we normally would, as if we're getting ready to start previews. Then where we would normally be starting previews, we have a run or 2 where the camera crew comes in and they're looking at things and taking light meter readings and things like that, so that they can say, hey, this needs to be this is reading as this, it needs to be bumped a little bit. Or they'll show, we actually have a monitor set up and Harold can actually see and go, okay, I see, that's not reading at all like the way I wanted it to. And it's interesting because what we're all learning is, you can look at the stage and you see what we have made, and then you look in the camera and it's very similar, but sometimes it's slightly off. The color temperature is not the same. Things read much darker on film than they do with the human eye. So there's things that we need to change. And then the music is a completely different thing as well. I mean, because we have to mic the actor, because we have to get clean audio of the actor, it also means that whereas normally you would want all the music that is in the show played during the show, we may not end up using much of, Beth may not hear much of what we're going to end up putting in the show, unless it is something that she needs to interact with in some way. It's not necessary for us to play it in the theater during the taping, because if you play it in the theater during the taping, you're going to get the remnants of it in Beth's mic, so that when we go later, we have to take that out in order to lay in the new track, because the new track needs to be laid in over the visuals. So what we will probably end up doing with this is that it will be pretty silent in the theater. It'll just be Beth talking, maybe with a few cues that have to be there. And then when we go back and we put all the, when Matt goes and does the sound edit after Maboud has done the visual edit of it, and we have the picture lock in place, that's where we will start adding all the sounds. So it's odd because this is one that we won't fully see come together in the way that we normally do in the theater. It'll come together sort of on the back ends Like Beth will be probably surprised by what ends up in the show, where it shows up in the show, because she may never hear it. So that's kind of the process with it. It's definitely a little different than normal, than just doing a normal play. I think the more audience members we're able to get in, the more we will make it just a fully normal play, and then take out sound and add it back in as necessary in post. So we'll see.
So the last question in the chat was just, is this a world premiere? The answer is no. It was performed by the playwright herself, both in Los Angeles and New York, and we think a couple other productions, but we are thrilled to be doing it. So I want to thank my colleagues for being here with me, Ivania Stack, Beth Hilton, and Ryan Roulette. The show is Throw Me on the Burnpile and Light Me Up. It premieres online on May 3rd, and it will run through May 30th. And we can't wait to see you. Can't wait to have you watch it, and then we can't wait to see you in person at some point eventually. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in, and stay in touch.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank